Hi, you guys. I'm here with Patrick Riley. He's a savant Renaissance man, and he has like these a thing called finance capital. What is it called?
Capital Revival.
Okay, capital revival. Because I was going to say Reaper Financial, but then that's what it used to be called, and now it's called Capital Revival. And he has all these like token coin things, and he's like he does a lot of stuff. Okay, but he also does basically free energy, and he's a renaissance man of like all different ideas on. He's cool. You're gonna like him. He's really cool. So welcome aboard, Patrick. Hello.
Hi.
Okay, so I met Patrick, I guess was that May or yeah, I think April or May when we went to the Journey to Truth conference, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, and I ended up having a bunch of meals with him and being like, "Oh, this dude's cool." And one of my favorite conversations that I'm just gonna ask him to start out with because this is like what I love the most is besides I really do love his free energy stuff, but the time travel. So I was like, "Okay, so what do you think is the deal with like the megaliths and the Atlantis and all this stuff?" And then you went into your stick of butter time thing, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." So let's go into give us your spiel on.
Yeah. So essentially there's a misconception in physics that time is a linear thing, that it is, a fixed one direction that we are traveling through it. That's not actually how time works at all. It's a permanent and a solid. Everything that has happened, everything that is right now, and everything that ever will happen exists simultaneously in the here and now. And we can prove this scientifically and through physics, and this is mainstream. This is not something that's outside of mainstream accepted science. So what that essentially means is that when we talk about megaliths and we talk about the pyramids and we talk about advanced technology, Atlantean technology, there's every opportunity that that is a future technology that we will be developing and building in the past. And actually, some of the devices I've designed, invented, and publicly released, those designs enable exactly that. So I don't want to jump too far and put the horse ahead of, or the cart ahead of the horse, but I can explain exactly how it's possible that the future humans could have built the past that we have now inherited and observed.
And they would have maybe chosen to go like whatever, like 10,000, 12,000 years ago, or whoever, however long, many years ago, because the conditions would have been more conducive than they are in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, we're going to use more and more resources moving forward. So there's every reason, if we were looking at here, we have unlimited resources to build this thing, and we know this is the most temperate climate at the most opportune time and with the least predators and with all of this resource naturally available on Earth. Do we, at that time, once we're this advanced civilization, do we have to go to another planet to do what we're looking to do, or can we do it at some point in the past on Earth? And there's different ways to go about that, but part of the key to this is that to do time travel, you don't actually have to travel through time. You can send information, and information can travel instantaneously through quantum entanglement. So we know this for a fact, and we know that humans now and humans at a certain point in our past had relatively the same DNA, relatively the same biological, physiological structures of our brains, that we could quantum entangle a future person to perhaps their own ancestor, somebody that is in their bloodline, and could quantum entangle to the present, share thoughts with the present, and perhaps share knowledge with the present.
So then what do you think about when people talk, because okay, my thing about like UFOs or alien beings and stuff like that is that I think we're actually almost being fed this narrative of, oh, it's at Alpha Centauri, or it's at these distant far off like conceptual places that you can't get to, where I'm like, I think there's actually like frequency thing. I actually think it's time travel too, in a way. Or you could say it is like there's a pancake of frequencies and we're going back and forth in between. Like, I've told this story before, but like like I think I even told this at the conference, but like I actually saw like this little, I don't know what it was, if it was an elf or a no, it was like a 1 foot tall being. And I could see it and it couldn't see me. So it's almost like one of those things where there may be like bleed over into other frequencies. And maybe that's the time travel that things have actually learned how to manipulate and use. Because the one thing that we have in common about UFOs, when people do see them, and there's been enough people that see them, is that they're here on Earth right now.
Mm.
So yeah, what do
Well, I would respond by saying anything that we think of is possible. First, let's start with just what actually shapes our reality, and that is our consciousness. We know from the double slit experiment, we know from atoms moving or not moving based on our observation of the atom. We know from our ability to quantum entangle at distance infinitum without the limitation of light speed. We know that consciousness is not contained inside of the physical mind. It is channeled through your body from the universe. That universal consciousness that you're channeling essentially through your soul or through a radio frequency, if we want to be much more, mainstream about it. That consciousness is effectively God. But in that sense, God is a construct of all of the consciousness within the universe, agreeing on what is real or what is not together. And it's actually a very interesting concept when you think about things like mathematics and physics and the stories of back in the Middle Ages where there was magic or witchcraft or things of that nature, and we go, oh, that's nonsense, right? Most people today would say it's nonsense. But until we actually measured it, until we checked if Schrodinger's cat was alive or dead, that was completely possible. So there's a fact we have to face in that as we measure things, as we determine what is possible or not, we aren't actually finding out if it was possible or not before. We are determining if it is possible or not into the future. And that is the reality we live in. And I know a lot of people really struggle to understand this in science that everything we have ever imagined, everything that is potentially out there, aliens, menehune, leprechauns, ghosts, whatever, those things do exist because we've thought of them. And because we thought of them, they are out there until we prove that they are either not there or actively there. If we can't prove that they're not there, you can't prove a negative, then it is there until proven otherwise.
I mean, you don't have, I mean, I totally am like into that too. I mean, and I also think that like your thoughts are actually things. Like your thoughts actually have creation power. And okay, so what do you say about the naysayers who are always like, yeah, but what about the grandfather paradox? Like, there's time travel can't exist because then you could kill your grandpa and you wouldn't be alive. Like anytime I talk about time travel, I always have some douchebag who tells me
I, I would say they've watched too many movies and not given it enough thought. And if they want to find out, they need to actually try it.
okay, so then let's lead into the technology that you have been prototyping and started to build. I watched the presentation with you, and it's really weird because like I have been having dreams of like magnet machines, like magnet cylindrical machines. I showed you like one of my drawings, but I've been having dreams of like those since I was a little kid, and I always draw them down and stuff. And then I saw your stuff and I was like, oh, I understand it and I know it works and I know that's a good thing. And so, yes, like go into it, Mr. Patrick. Show us.
All right. Well, I'll kind of use the slides I used from our talk out in Illinois here, or as Toasty, my friend in Illinois likes to call it Illinois, but we'll we'll go over these. Um, First, who am I and why do you care? So a little bit about me, just so people understand. I know you introduced me as an acquired savant, but essentially, I was a combat medic in the Army. I got blown up in 2009, and my TBI or head injury caused me, aside from many migraines for all the years to come, it gave me a different way of thinking, essentially neuroplasticity. When my brain healed, it created new neural pathways. And I started to see what I would describe as systems. So whether that was getting back from deployment and building a car from the frame up with no formal training in mechanics, or understanding anatomy and physiology, or financial systems, like I've now built a competing economic system to modern monetary theory, or understanding systems of energy or even consciousness. Um, so the neuroplasticity from the TBI caused me to become an inventor back in 2009, and I started working on these different ideas. You see the Starship Enterprise, we'll get to that. Um, so the first thing I wanted to do was essentially figure out how to, as I was building motors, I was thinking about it, and I'm like, well, this is it's kind of stupid. It's kind of cavemanish that we are using explosions to move pistons. It seemed silly to me. And I was like, well, how do we create force to move a piston without actually creating heat and burning fuel and making exhaust? And this seemed like a natural question for me to ask. What I settled on is what I call the Riley radial, which is this design we're looking at here that's 30 centimeters in diameter right now. It's very scalable. And everywhere you see red is a permanent magnet. And I'll explain where there's magic, and when I break the laws of physics, y'all will know it, but I'm not going to. And I called this one Thoth, which is the history of temporal humanity. And that's because I'm explaining how we're going to actually manipulate time using this technology. So to do that, we just need four technologies. And I do have about 40 or so different inventions, but I'm sure we're not going to get to them all tonight. That's fine. I did open source all of these. They are unpatented. I do have some patents pending, but they are not related to this. And I minted this to many blockchains. As I'm sure your viewers know, most people who work on free energy find themselves working on growing daisies. Um, and to avoid that, I went ahead and minted this to about a dozen mainstream blockchains so that if they were to kill me, they would only draw attention to my work, but further, they would have to take down the Bitcoin network, the Solana network, the XRP ledger, Ethereum, and so on and so forth, in order to remove these from the internet.
So technically, how do you mint something to the blockchain? You put images of it in, so where it can't actually be removed?
Yeah, essentially what you're doing is you're taking an image and you're uploading it as a transaction, and that becomes what's called a non-fungible token, or an NFT. And that NFT or that image is then recorded across the entire blockchain network. And to remove it, they would have to hack or shut down that entire network, which no one has successfully done anything of the sort yet.
Okay.
Um, So I talked about how I kind of asked a few questions, and the answer I came to about how to move a piston without force, without without an explosion, I should say, how did I create force without the explosion, is using electromagnetism. So now everyone knows a magnet against another magnet, you have your north and south. And if you put north to north, you're going to have magnetic resistance. If you put north to south, you're going to have attraction. So that's just common knowledge. I'm not doing anything illegal here. Promise. It's if you don't believe me, try it out with a fridge magnet or something. Um, Now, in this design, what I essentially did, I made a radial motor, which is similar to old aircraft, you know, prop propeller motors that you would see in 1920s to 1940s pre-jet engines. And using where you see the red, we would be using permanent magnets, and then we would have an apparatus floating over that. You also see a little bit of red around each of the cylinder there. On top of that, we would put the rotating assembly. So this is floating. Essentially, there is no friction. There is no contact anywhere in this motor. Everything is floating based on magnetic resistance to other stable solid magnets. So we aren't creating any kind of mechanical resistance here. Now, on top of that rotating assembly, I can put my piston rods that are again floating. and I have my pistons themselves that are floating on those rods with permanent magnets, and I cap that with another piece of the rotating assembly and the other piece of the modular crankshaft there. So now I've enclosed it. So basically what I have is I have a device that can rotate 360 degrees.
Mhm.
And with that 360-degree rotation, there is no friction. Now, I know that doesn't seem as amazing as as some people would like it to be. There isn't any magic involved here. Um, so now I've put a cylinder sleeve or a piston sleeve on each cylinder, and I've wrapped that in a copper coil. And these are essentially made out of carbon fiber to aid with the conductivity.
Mhm.
And at the end of each copper coil or piston sleeve is an electromagnet. An electromagnet is literally just a piece of ferrous material, any kind of iron that you've wrapped a coil around. And as you electrically charge it, the electricity wrapping around that charged ferrous material is going to either attract or repel like any other magnet. Electromagnets, again, are very common, not a outside of the laws of physics kind of thing. Uh, Now here's where I apply the laws of physics. So as a piston passes through a coil of copper, and that piston has a permanent magnet on it, if you are to pass a permanent magnet through any coil, you create what's called Faraday's law, and that is you're creating a current perpendicular to the direction of your coil. So in other words, as my magnet goes through this coil in the piston, it is creating a charge throughout that copper wire. Now, number one here has this electromagnet on it, but the copper coil that is passing the piston through it is not firing the number one piston. What I'm doing here is I'm actually going from number one over to number three. Number three, as the piston pulls towards the electromagnet, is then sending a charge up this coil and sending it down to number five, and then so on and so forth to number seven. So essentially, I've forced movement, I've denied rest inside of this rotating assembly because every time the piston rotates, one of the pistons is going to be forcing its way up that copper coil. And as it forces its way up that copper coil, it is then sending a charge to an electromagnet that is pulling the next piston in the firing order. Now, I've enclosed two separate motors into one rotating assembly because instead of doing just the one, three, five, and seven, I've got two, four, six, and eight are firing each other independently of the other four. What that does is as number one is being pulled up, we can actually have it so that number six is pushing. And as number three is being pulled, I guess in this orientation to the east, you have the number seven again pushing. So this again denies rest and removes the mechanical workload. You have
Okay.
no friction.
Asymmetrical put like push for each. Okay.
Exactly. So you have an asymmetrical push and you're moving that rotating assembly at equal and opposite force,
Mhm.
and that is forcing a 360-degree turn. And what you're actually turning is the alternator here in the middle, which is your z-axis, if you will, or your vertical axis. And that is ready to receive an alternator, which is what you have in your car. And most people don't really realize this, but alternators are exactly how nuclear power, geothermal power, dam or hydroelectric power, basically everything but solar works through turning an alternator.
How do you
They
turn this off and on though? Like the initial gravity or the magnetic like pulses inside the alternator. Like how do you turn it off and on?
So theoretically, you could always put a switch on this. You could use diodes, which are, one directional electric valves essentially.
Mhm.
And you could put switches throughout your wiring to allow this to slow down, or you could use magnetic braking on the alternator to slow it down.
Okay. Okay. That's we need that. So that's a good idea.
So now this is designed to be modular. So a 45-degree turn of the modular crankshaft means you can add another stack or another module. And this is just explaining alternators. This is exactly what's in everybody's car unless you drive an electric.
Mhm.
Uh, but so what this means is basically as long as the rotation of the motor is not overpowered by friction, which it's not because we're using magnetic resistance, there is no friction. The passing of the permanent magnet through the coil is sufficient to power the electromagnet. So, okay, we got that. We can make it bigger. We can make the coil with more, we can use a stronger magnet. We can increase the speed or motion of the magnet, and we can increase the area of or the number of turns of the coil, the copper coil. So we can use a bigger gauge wire, or we can do more turns. So we're able to guarantee these top two. The electromagnet is sufficient to pull the stable magnet without overcoming the rotating assembly's magnetic repulsion. So that means if we needed to, we could dial down our electromagnetic pull, and then the force of the rotating body is sufficient to overcome the alternator's winding resistance. So the alternator, which is going to this, is basically, again, just turning a permanent magnet against copper coil. And so the interesting thing to me is how few scientists and people who talk about energy actually understand where energy comes from. When they talk about electricity, like I was saying, if we're talking about a nuclear power plant, people think that's some very high science going on with a full nuclear reaction and that they're somehow drawing this electricity straight from that nuclear reaction. That's not what's happening. What they're doing is they're putting nuclear high radiation rods, reactor rods into water, and that is heating up the water, which creates steam, and that steam goes up and turns
Oh yeah.
a turbine, which is basically turning an alternator. Same thing with
Seems like
geothermal
such
power.
when you explain it like that, it just seems like such a long
Yeah,
process.
exactly, right? So you can get a whole lot of force turning that alternator, but it's still just turning an alternator. When you're running your car, you're just turning an alternator. When you're doing geothermal, you're just turning an alternator. When you're doing wind turbines, the wind is turning the alternator. So the problem was never about which of these different fuels or liquid petroleum gas or coal or any of those things to create electricity. The problem was always how do we turn the alternator most efficiently? And that is what I've devised here as a way to turn the alternator with no fuel input, no exhaust, and effectively that is free energy. Now, I said that the outlier here is solar. Solar is basically using a silicon superconductor that is being bombarded by the ultraviolet radiation that knocks loose electrons in that wafer, that chip, or the silicon,
Right.
and then it pushes it in a direction either towards the north or south pole of conductors in that solar panel. But the funny part about that is the silicon will never run out of electrons. There's infinite electrons being added back into that wafer from somewhere. And the same is true of an alternator. You're not actually wearing out those magnets or the copper in the alternator. And in fact, the copper in an alternator or the copper in our power lines is not carrying electricity through it so much as the electricity is flowing along it. So when you turn an alternator right now in your car or in a nuclear power plant or geothermal or a coal plant or anything we're doing, you're already pulling electricity from the ether. We are not creating electricity.
Okay, that's interesting. But we just don't we have never been taught that, so we don't even
Exactly. And so there's a whole bunch of nuclear physicists out there that will get really mad at this concept, or liquid. petroleum engineers and things like that that are going to say, "Oh no, no, this is all, we're burning this fuel or we're doing this or we're doing that." At the end of the day, they are using electricity that is ambient in the air, and they are
Right.
channeling that ambient electricity through either an alternator or through a collection process off of a superconductor. That's
Okay.
it.
So then what so then what do you believe, just the just the greed narrative of like that's what's kept this suppressed for this long? Because I mean, you're actually, I mean, like you said, like a lot of these free energy, there's conferences on free energy, there's like all kinds of book. I mean, there's so many people who have come up with ways of even if it's using water or using magnets, these kinds of things, and then they get offed, and then the people say like, oh, well, maybe it's the petroleum companies that do it, or big finance, like the whatever, the big car companies. I don't really know, but it seems to me like it's just like a it's just like kind of like a small thing that they can already just add into their existing machines. And I don't
Yeah. So the reality is that our system of scarcity, if you will, our economy is based on scarcity. Scarcity creates value. And if we don't have scarcity, we don't have a way to price or value things. And if you can't price or value things, then how does one, domineering rich person who's already on top maintain their status on top if everyone has abundance?
I mean, still petroleum is used in plastic, it's used in medicine, it's used in all kinds of other products and things.
Yeah.
You think like you could like you could just, I mean, make like improve on permanent neodymium magnets and do more research on, material science to where like I mean, you don't, it's not scarcity, but you can create better, better and better. Um,
Well, at the end of the day, the unfortunate reality is that the elites out there, as people like to call them, the Gates and the Soros and the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and all these people with all these means to do things and to silence things, uh, they're lazy and they're stupid. That's what it comes down to. They could fix almost anything that we have going on for humanity, including the problems that they see. They will say things like, "We're overpopulated." We're not overpopulated. We're underdeveloped. And that's very easily demonstrable and very easily fixed with their resources, but they don't want to fix that. I think what they want essentially is their breakaway civilization that they are fully in control of and domineering over. And I think we're kind of a little bit of the slush fund for that.
yeah, I think that's a really good way of saying it. I mean, so then, I mean, I know you told, this kind of leads into, I know you told this little story about how you, on one of your military missions, you found like this mask that was like a replica of like some diplomat. And it was like, yeah, like, what do you think about that? Can you tell us about like that story? I know
Yeah, so
all the details of it, but just, like basically what, yeah.
Yeah, so this is one that people love to hear, and unfortunately, it's not a very deep story, but I could tell it. So essentially, I was on a mission somewhere in Southeast Asia. I can't be very specific, and I was meeting with somebody that was not on these terms. It was in something that was essentially unrelated, but this high level person, because I was in civil affairs and psyops, and I would meet with some very high level individuals with governors and princesses and presidents and just, people that are able to affect outcomes. So I was meeting with a very high level individual who was one of four in his rank, essentially. And he wanted to blow the whistle, and he wanted to provide me and one comrade that was with me on this mission. He wanted to provide us with evidence of the crimes of one of the leaders of his country. And so he started by showing us, some mass killing photographs and things of that nature, that there was some extrajudicial executions going on in his country. And then he pulled out a shoebox And in the shoebox, he had a mask. And the mask was the leader of this country. And that in itself is a little bit weird. And I know there's been the whole, anon thing about masks for years now, but this was not one of those masks. This was a mask that felt and looked like it was still alive while not on a person. And it was warm to the touch as if it was living, and it had eyes still. And on the inside of the mask, there was essentially a grid-like structure or a diamond-like structure, as if something had been wearing it that had perhaps scales, and the eyes were perhaps not for human eyes to look through.
I mean, like
Uh,
wider set or something, or yeah.
just like I didn't put it close to my face because I was super creeped out by it, to be completely honest. But I looking from a little bit of distance, it was clear that that was not something I could be able to make anything out if I did put it on.
Well, see, that kind of thing just makes me wonder, what we're even dealing with the elite, or what we're even dealing with governments and all that stuff. I mean, I don't think that that's kind of limited to just the Southeast Asia like area, or
Yeah.
like if that technology exists, then who knows what they've been
And all I can say is truth is always stranger than fiction. The realities I do know for a fact that I can't talk about are things that people simply wouldn't believe. But the best thing I can equate this to is if you think about the Manhattan Project and the building of the nuclear bomb, this happened in the 1930s. And in the late 1930s, they were already developing the nuclear bomb that could destroy Nagasaki, Hiroshima. But if they'd never used it in World War II, there is, and we had never seen nuclear testing since, there is literally 0% chance that anybody in today's modern world would actually believe that we have something like the hydrogen bomb that's big enough to take out New York with a single bomb,
right.
and that it was, by the way, developed while people were still using FM radio, horse and buggy, and that's the reality, though,
Well,
isn't
that's what makes me like I've been using my the AI stuff a lot lately, and I'm just kind of going like if they're giving this access to the public now, I believe that they've had this technology way longer than what when they release it.
Absolutely. And if you think about the first computer that the NSA had in the 1950s, there was nothing publicly available that was comparable to the NSA's computer. Before the NSA even, no such agency, before they even officially existed, they had something that wouldn't come out until a Pentium 3 in the 90s. So that was a solid 40-year lead for the NSA. So very clearly we've got secret technology that is not just decades, but at this point probably centuries ahead of what the public has access to and or can acknowledge.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, it really does make you kind of pause in terms of like the level that we have been manipulated is really I mean, like we could basically like our entire news cycle, everything we think we know could be completely AI for like 40 years, and we don't even know.
Well, the funny thing about the technologies I've developed is that I know for a fact Nikola Tesla was smarter than I am, and I actually didn't even realize until after the fact that my designs mirror in sacred geometry almost exactly his designs for an AC motor from 1896. So these things have existed since the late 1800s, early 1900s at least. So I'm by no means the first person to do this. I'm well aware of that. I'm not doing anything that is necessarily original. It's organic. I thought of it, but I'm certain that these things have already been solved and done by secret societies, governments, intelligence agencies for over 100 years.
Well, I think like the coolest thing about yours is putting it on the blockchain to protect yourself, and to also it's kind of like it's like there's no get rich quick scheme of like patenting this thing where you don't get taken out. It's like Tesla didn't die rich. He like he got screwed over by um Henry Ford or who screwed him over. Like
Well, so it was
I can't remember.
Westinghouse, JP Morgan, a whole gang of them.
And then it's so it's kind of like the brightest mind doesn't necessarily win in a corrupt society. So I think this is a really good like counter chess play, which is cool.
Yeah, it's kind of a chaos move, if you will. I'm throwing something out there they can't do anything about.
And like your hope is that actually people start prototyping this, like actually go try to make it.
Yeah, I want people to build this. The tooling for it is a little bit difficult to come by. You can do some things by 3D printing, but then once you start, shaping ceramic permanent magnets, we're talking about water jets, CNCs, some pretty advanced metallurgy or techniques that frankly aren't common or cheap. Um, but I definitely want people to start working on it and start prototyping it.
Even with my magnet sheet, my magnet was a like S-shaped magnets that are dipole, like so they're like south, north, and south within one magnet bar, but shaped differently. I tried to get those made, and I talked to like 16 or so different manufacturers, magnet manufacturers, like in Asia and in the US, and they're like, no, we don't make those. So like some of the stuff, like you actually will just have to get a little crucible and do it yourself. Like I know they've made them in scientific labs. I didn't invent the concept of that like kind of magnet. It's just that you can't buy them. So you have to be able to, and I think it's going to come to that. People are just going to have to like get makeshift in their garage and start making stuff and then have fun with it. But I mean, look
Well,
look at the flying machines in our subconscious as we were talking about in the earlier, or the UFOs. I mean, like these technologies are existing. Someone's using them already.
yeah, and the reality is that our technological advances, when we start thinking about, computers and AI and flight and all the things that we're doing as humans right now that are really only about 100 years old, our entire society rests on magnets and copper. That's it. That's how advanced we are as
Copper's not
basically.
even that great of a conductor, too.
It's
Like,
not. Silver is much better, which is why it's a precious metal.
mhm.
Yeah, or iridium, of course, which is a little more exotic, but um, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, let's get into then how you're fixing the financial stuff. So I know you're a big like XRP guy, and then you've done some tokens and you have from my understanding, like your ARC and your Art Institute tokens, like they they work off of XRP.
Yes. So all of our tokens are built on the XRP ledger. We have 9 different tokens in our ecosystem. Our primary one, RPR, what we do is for the people who hold the token, they're able to vote every 2 weeks, but it can also be a static vote. They can just leave it where they want it. And we pay them XRP as passive income. We also make payments towards their debts on their behalf. So basically, they purchase the token, they log into our system, and they log in with their wallet. Once they're logged in, they're able to do a KYC AML. We do have to do that for legal regulatory reasons. And then they also connect their bank account through Plaid, which is the same service used by Kraken or Coinbase or any other of the big players. What that does is it gives us visibility of their accounts, but more specifically, we're looking at the liabilities or the debts. So we pull in the account number and routing number and the mailing address, all that information for the bank, and we can then send payments on their behalf every 2 weeks to directly to their mortgage, to their student loan, to their car note, to a personal loan, to a credit card, whatever that debt is. So what that essentially does is right now the way that the economy that has been built around us are kind of our prison of modern monetary theory that, steals from us with inflation and taxation and So many things that it's not worth getting into. But what they've done is they've made it so you have to sell your future to afford a present. If you want to buy a home, you need to take out a mortgage for 30 years, and then you are effectively putting yourself into indentured servitude or slavery for the next 30 years to afford to live in a home. So, what my system does is it says you've been working your whole life and you've earned so much. Now you're able to use what you earned and purchase a token. That becomes tokenization of your labor. And now the labor you did in your past affords you a future because now that labor you did in the past as a token is helping to pay down your debts in perpetuity into the future. So if we took this system and we scale it up and we replace something like Social Security and Medicare, which is 15.3% of your income, uh, by the time you ever see it, if you ever see it, which is supposed to go bankrupt in about 7 years, but they say that every year.
Right.
Um, by the time you actually see it, you get less than a tenth of the value you would have if you just put the same amount of money into a money market or a 401k or something like that. 401ks are also a scam, but I'm not going to get into it. Um, so essentially, that's $1.2 trillion a year at current rates for the United States that is going into Social Security and Medicare, and very little is getting back to the actual people that are putting that money in. Instead, most of it's being pulled out the back door to go into, wars in Ukraine or Israel or whatever. So that 1.2 trillion, what would happen if that same amount was put into the RPR or the Riley economic system through capital revival is that 50% of that would go towards paying the debts of those who contributed. 25% of that becomes a permanent floor for those tokens. So we do back all of our tokens collateralized in XRP. We have a limit buy order for the entire supply at any given time so that the floor can never go below that. There's always a bare minimum value. And then 25% remaining would be passive income. So that would be a Social Security income of $300 billion for Americans, which is more than is being paid out right now in Social Security. And if we compare that 600 billion in debt relief, that's comparable to currently 1 trillion in credit card debt for the entire nation. So think of the difference that could make, and then over time. And then essentially that means that if somebody worked for, say, just 2 years, 4 years, those 2 to 4 years they worked has now earned them a certain amount of RPR, and they're always going to be earning off of that into the future. It's as if you start retiring the minute you start working.
But then it's like, are you basically, does this go up in value based on the percentage that does get bought into XRP? Like, are you assuming that this kind of goes along with that XRP goes up?
XRP assists it, but it doesn't need XRP.
Okay,
So
right. So it's
its
sort of like,
value, yep, its value is in the utility or people using it. But if XRP goes up, then its minimum value also goes up. If XRP goes down, we can still transition that XRP that's backing it into RLUSD or USDC, and then we can still set that same limit buy order at that higher value. And as the price of XRP goes down, the price of our token doesn't need to.
so in an idealized world for you, how would this like if I work, okay, like what would you, instead of putting, well, I don't have a choice for Social Security, they just take it out anyway. But like, let's say that instead of putting it into a 401k, I put like $100 a month into, like, is that the kind of thing you would say people should start doing? Like,
Yeah,
only,
that I mean that would be good. So one of the things we're doing right now is proofing this with a concept called Fortify, which is for businesses. And basically what I did is I picked up a couple of 2025 vehicles that are being rented out on Turo. So those vehicles are paying down their own note, and at the same time, anything they earn past that note is being used to purchase RPR, and that RPR is also being used to bring income and pay down the debt on those vehicles. So essentially, that accelerates the payoff on those vehicles, and then you even if those vehicles are completely paid off, now you have an asset you can sell for cash, but you still own the RPR to start reducing the debt on the next income asset, whether that's another vehicle or whether that's a income property, a quadruplex or something of that nature.
So it almost sounds like it's like instead of it being a taxation, it's the inverse of a tax. It's like, yeah.
I'm turning their system on its head.
Okay, well, I like that. That's cool. And so, so how does this like I think as we're speaking, I got a like right before we started, I got some notification that Bitcoin's at an all-time high right now. So it's like,
Right.
like yeah, so I guess the more people start moving to having confidence in alternative like cryptos or alternative currencies, just like the better this kind of systems are going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are going to transition, and I don't mean to say this as like a fringe. I don't know if crypto is still considered fringe. I've definitely been in it since it was.
Yeah,
Um, but the reality is we have $37 trillion in debt, and we are adding $1 trillion every 100 days, and that will continually accelerate for the national debt.
yeah,
The US is bankrupt and getting worse by the day. And at some point, our economy will collapse, the dollar will collapse, and we're accelerating towards that exponentially. So what happens when main currencies, a lot of currencies have collapsed in history, but it's never been the global reserve currency that the dollar is after Bretton Woods. Um, what happened historically, and the biggest way to fix the collapse of a currency is to replace that currency with something new. It's what they did in the Weimar Republic when suddenly you just had Deutschmarks. They There was no extra backing or value behind them, but it did fix the collapse of the Weimar Republic. And so, what is actually going to happen is as we hit this debt bubble, the United States is at some point going to default, but not before all of the politicians that have been insider trading for your entire life, my entire life,
right.
they're all going to set themselves up in the next thing. And that's the main reason that they've been slowing down crypto adoption. But if anybody out there has noticed, President Trump's very pro crypto, and now the Republicans are pro crypto. And I'm sure the Democrats will come around as they start, they might say they're against crypto, but I guarantee they're going to be accepting crypto donations.
Yeah.
So the fact that they're now turning around to start, putting it up for bat, that means that they know we're about to collapse the dollar and they're ready for that move into the next thing.
So what do you recommend for people? It's like put as much into crypto as possible right now if you can, or
I always recommend diversify. And of course, I'm not a financial advisor. Never put anything that you can't afford to lose because there is always risk, right? I would recommend diversifying into some crypto at a minimum. I would recommend precious metals, gold, silver, which another of my tokens does actually pay out physical gold and silver. Um, and I would recommend some stocks. I will say stock market should be your lower allocation. It is the highest risk. We are on the verge of a 1929 style meltdown of the stock market. I'm
yeah.
not saying it's going to happen right now. I'm not going to say it's going to happen a year or 5 years from now, but we are in a bubble unlike anything we've seen ever. It's way past what we had with the dot-com bubble, and it's way past what we had in 2008. And for that matter, it's past 1929.
And what do you make of the whole like housing is basically quickly becoming non-affordable for people?
So a big part of that is the rates, which we do expect the rates will drop here within the next quarter. So at 6 points right now for interest rates on homes, most people simply can't buy a house. Uh, but I will say that the inflation in values of homes is not because homes have become more valuable. It's because our money has become that much
Got it.
less valuable and there's that much more circulating. And a lot of people don't realize that 60% of all money in existence was printed during COVID-19.
Oh,
And
that's an interesting statistic. Okay, I didn't hear that one.
Yeah, so if you think about that, that means that the baby boomers that had things in 401k and Social Security or savings under their mattress, there was they had 100% and then, you know, but their 100% was within that 40. Somebody went and printed another 150% against their 100%, and what they had was 100 and now it shrank to 40%. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So essentially their wealth was stolen. And every time we increase the debt bubble, your wealth is being stolen. It's a silent taxation through inflation.
And so, I talked to Rosemary and she said to ask you, and Rosemary's amazing. She's a big advocate for you. Like she, even before I even met you at the conference, she was like, "Oh, you're going to the same conference as Patrick. You need to talk to him. He's such like a big world." She said you're the biggest like big picture thinker that she knows. And I agree, you're like super big picture thinker. So then give us the end game. Um, like how do you think that with your technologies and everything that this is gonna um like be okay?
Well, so I'm going to breeze forward a little bit because I know actually I haven't fulfilled a promise from the beginning of this show, which was to talk about time travel.
Oh
So
yes, I love time travel.
I'm
Okay.
going to breeze forward a little bit through some of the technology so people understand why this is possible. So this is the Riley radial in an 8 stack, removes all of the mechanical resistance possible. It's as efficient as possible, so on and so forth, right? Now this can go into what's called a ionic thruster. Now this is something that's already in existence. It's not anything new. I didn't create the ionic thruster. This is something MIT does, and this channel I'm given a link to does it. But I did create a better way to do it, and that's based on sacred geometry and material principles. But I'll kind of skip through this because I know it'll run really long if I talk about every detail of every technology. But basically, I'm throwing a spark gap from silver to gold, which the gold is not going to catch it. But I'm also, what I did invent is called the ionic drive circuit. And this circuit denies rest and forces the positive ions through a series of plates instead of from one to another.
Mhm.
Now, this is essentially to create a thruster, which can replace typical rocket engines. It can replace, jet engines on planes, so that they can use that free energy instead of fuel. And then I also created something called the quantum helisphere. I know this one's going to sound a little bit out there, but essentially what I'm doing is I'm quantum entangling two human cells that have been grown through a breeding program and implanted with markers in order to measure their position from a north-south rotation. So by quantum entangling that, we're able to communicate across time and space instantaneously with no delay based on light speed. Well, quote by Tesla. So this is my way of doing faster than light. People that say we can't do faster than light are not very serious people. The reason they're not serious is because the fastest admitted human technology travels at 0.000589% of the speed of light. I didn't make that up. It's actually calculates out to 589 for my XRP guys out there. So, um, now, if that's the fastest we've ever gone, it's ridiculous to say that the speed of light is actually a speed limit. In the early 1900s, there was Time magazine articles saying we would never go past 100 miles per hour because we would literally be torn apart by the forces of the wind against us. Obviously, that wasn't true, right? So my design here is basically for faster than light is basically kind of a subwoofer using ultraviolet C radiation to push using the heaviest light particle, push anything that's in front of it out of the way. And that would be creating what we would traditionally through Roddenberry terms call a warp bubble. I'm creating similar to an airplane wing that has, a low pressure area above the wing and a high pressure area below the wing, and that creates lift. I'm essentially doing the exact same thing to travel through space. So now what that gives us is the Thoth rocket. Now, the Thoth rocket, and you asked where do I see all of this going, right? So this is something that, I thought of myself that's not it's not even spoken of in any science fiction book or movie I ever found. So I'm a little bit not humble on this one, let's say. But so we know that if you put a giant mirror 10 light years away from the Earth and looked at it through a telescope, theoretically we'd see 20 years into the past because the light had to travel 10 light years to get there and 10 light years to get back. Uh, Now, what we can essentially do, because we have the Thoth rocket that can communicate instantaneously and it can travel faster than the speed of light. It has infinite energy and the ability to exponentially produce energy with my design and to output that energy through the ionic drive circuit. We can send a probe with something akin to the Hubble telescope or the James Webb Space Telescope that goes out and collects light, and it can go out and it can record the past. So if we send it 11,600 light years away, the light that was touching the Earth at that point in time is just reaching that probe, and we can record that light as it reaches it, and we can send that data instantaneously to us here on Earth now. So that means that we would be able to watch the rise and fall of Atlantis. We would be able to watch Jesus walk the earth. We would be able to watch the building of the pyramids. We'd be able to watch the assassination of JFK. We can record history in 4 dimensions. Now, if we can record history in 4 dimensions and send that information basically across time and space, the more interesting thing about all this, I don't want to skip this one. So we can find all the missing persons. We can find all of the unsolved murders. We can find all the human trafficking. We can do that with this technology. Um, but here's where it gets even more interesting. Because we're quantum entangling something and we're sending that information across time and space, as that rocket is, say, 20 light years away, it can be looking at Nikkianajones 20 years ago, and it can see exactly where you are on Earth. It can see exactly what conditions, perhaps the frequencies created by the things around you, as well as the temperature that you are in, and it can recognize here are the structures that would have existed genetically and are guaranteed to have been in your brain then 20 years ago. And here they are today. And we can say, all right, we're going to put your brain today into the exact same state of all the environment that it was in 20 years ago. And now we're able to essentially have you think inside of your mind now, and that thought is being thought by yourself 20 years ago.
So that's how you can almost have like your future self talk to your past self.
Exactly. So because we're able to travel faster than light speed, as soon as we do that, we're also quantum entangling that information and we're now able to communicate into the past. Now, assuming that we know this, let's say that I want to know the future. That's a little bit of a ridiculous statement, right? But if I know that I'm here now and I know my quantum state right now, why can't I program a probe to go out 10,000 years from now, record what happened before it for 10,000 years, and also entangle that information and send it back to myself now?
Yeah. I mean,
So essentially, what we can do for our future selves is ascension. We can remove the barrier of time from humanity. We become a 4 dimensional species. And in doing so, that's when we start to understand that we might have actually been, we could be at the beginning of the story and Atlantis could be the end of the story. And that is not out of the question. That's not out of the timeline. It's very much scientifically plausible.
Yeah, that's this makes a lot of sense to me because it's, that, and then that solves a lot of the, well, like where's the technology on how they built some of these structures or some of these things? Like how'd they build the Great Pyramids, right? Like where's the cranes? Where's the dump trucks? Where's the tools that you use to cut these things? Like, there's so many things that are unanswered, and it could actually have a lot of answers for that.
And I would say I, I'll say something I suspect, I don't know this, but the biggest challenge with traveling through time, if you were to send either data or if you were to attempt to send a physical object or a person, your biggest challenge is not actually the time travel. We've accomplished that in the lab with time crystals and things like that. Google, you can go Google it. There's scientific papers. We've sent information or things back in time, milliseconds. That's possible. We know. Now, the problem is actually location. So
Yeah.
in the universe, everything is moving, including the universe itself, including the galaxies, including the solar system, including the planets. And if I were to try to send Nikkianajones back in time 10 minutes, she might actually,
End up
if,
in space.
yeah, she might end up in space literally trillions of miles away because we don't have any relativistic object to focus on and say, this is our point that is stable and everything is moving around it. We don't have that yet. So I would say that if at some point we do accomplish this and we create this technology, the Great Pyramid and the way that it's constructed and its ability to withstand throughout what I suspect could be eons, that becomes something of a stable point in space and time that we could potentially be referencing as it also points to Orion's belt. And we, of course, have, other star systems that are aligned to ancient structures. And perhaps that's why, because now we know exactly where they are. Whereas if we don't align them
Correct
to a
location.
larger system, we have no idea.
But I almost feel like, there's like they always talk about like near-death experiences, or that, like there's that silver thread cord or silver line that somebody has, like to even almost say your like astral body. So I almost feel like there would be a way if you're time traveling within your own self that you would be able to like follow your silver cord somehow. So I feel like that's not going to be as much as the issue as the memory wipe or like maintaining your consciousness that you had in the future and it not getting jumbled in the whatever the pathways of getting back to the past or future, whatever. And then also you don't have the machine there. So like you don't have a physical machine, so you have to have like the knowledge to build one again, or and unless it's all somehow we figure it out within our own consciousness, which that is, yeah. Those are going to be harder to for I think to like navigate in the future, like because um yeah, like, because I guess you could almost perceive certain locations if you were, like, say, specifically, like, yeah, the Great Pyramids there. We know they've been there a while, but, um, yeah, I don't know. So, what do you think of? It's funny because you had like the 20-year thing. What do you think of like this like secret space program people with the 20-year and back thing? Like, do you think they've already developed something similar to this that people are using for things like that?
I wouldn't discount it. I'm not the type of person that, just calls anything fake or false. I don't have knowledge firsthand of it. I don't doubt it, but I don't believe it either. I don't really believe anything. I either know or I don't know. And in this case, I don't know. Or to quote Socrates, true wisdom comes from knowing that you know nothing. And I think that I know very little. And the smarter you get, the more you realize that's true. Not to suggest I'm in any way.
I'm similar with that. I think I just got I saw the 20-year thing, and I'm like, oh, and then like there's also they've talked about that the looking glass. I've heard that about if you've ever heard of the looking glass project. It was like some sort of almost like Harry Potter mirror pendulum that you look through and you can see 20 years into the future or something. Um, So yeah, it's interesting the whole mirror effect too with time travel. And I mean, I guess because you're basically viewing light, so that makes a lot of sense. I don't know. There's so many cool things to consider. So yeah, I guess so with your, you know, financial stuff, like how are you going to actually start trying to prototype these tech, like what's the end goal? Is the end goal to like get funding enough to where you can try start putting like these more cleaner energies into place?
So I'm already working on prototypes, but it is slow going. But with the funds I expect that the company will bring in, it will make things much quicker and able to move much quicker. I do have, like I said, about 35, 40 other inventions that are all things that'll change the world. And I intend to well, I intend to build many of them simultaneously and to apply them actively. One of the most important ones is Ascension Point, which is a space station that is meant to mine the asteroid belt, which is essentially our next step for humanity if we want to become a interplanetary, interstellar species. I know Elon Musk has his little rockets, but those aren't going to get the job done. He knows that, but that's beside the point. Ascension Point is a 500-meter diameter toroidal space station that I will be able to build wholly here on Earth and to deploy from Earth into the Lagrange point between Earth and the Moon. And from there, we'll start mining the main belt between Mars and Jupiter, which in itself will provide nearly infinite resources for us to continue to develop through some of the other financial tools such as Ascension Index and including RPR and ASC will be able to start essentially becoming the bank to countries. I'm not going to mince words. I am trying to replace the entire economic system as it is today. So I would be able to go in and start replacing that in an equitable manner. They're not going to be upset. They're going to walk away rich. But everyone else gets to benefit as well. And it's an egalitarian system where everyone essentially wins, and we can eliminate homelessness, we can eliminate poverty, we can eliminate forced labor, slavery, which is still very much a thing in today's world. And essentially, I see that as a point where because I would have this much influence, it's not going to be realistic for me to fall under any one government's authority. And I will need to at some point make my own. Um,
Government?
and yes, uh, and I have locations picked out for that, if you will. And I intend to start basically building the next society, the next generation of humanity that comes for the next age. We went through the robber barons and the 1800s, and we went through the industrial age, and we went through um, the manufacturing age, and then the digital age. And I'm trying to bring about the next age, if you will, which will be going into space and interplanetary, interstellar. And I do intend to build and model much of the society off of essentially what is the Star Trek ideals, or the Gene Roddenberry ideals of a ideal Earth society.
Okay, well, that's a that's the most ambitious goal I've ever heard, which is great. So then how can we support you? How can people like, yeah, what do we do?
Spreading information, of course, helps. I know everything I just said to some people is going to sound very, very lofty and very, very impossible and all those things. The people who are naysayers, I'm sorry, but they don't matter because, everybody that ever succeeded had naysayers and nobody cares. But if you spread the information about what I'm doing, if you spread the Riley radial, if you spread the economic system, if you just share this interview, you're helping in that way. If you want to follow me, I'm at acquired underscore savant on Twitter or X. and I'm on there all the time. I do talk a lot about XRP. I also talk about politics. I'm not afraid to say I am somewhat of a filter. I don't intend to enrich those who I consider morally or ethically unworthy, so I'm not shy about stating my thoughts on certain matters. But yeah, if you want to help or if this sounds like a mission that you are genuinely interested in, by all means, reach out to me on X or Twitter or just share the information as we go.
Rock on. Okay, that's good. I think that's a good place to end it because that was like a boom kind of mic drop thing. So, yeah, Patrick, it's been super fun having you on, and I've loved chatting with you, and I can't wait to see some of these things come into like full-blown manifestation because I think they'll be awesome. So, yeah, thanks for existing. It's good.
Well, thank you, Nikki.